"There's no place for you here." Her voice was steady, sharp, and loud enough for half the hall to hear. My daughter, in her white lace gown, stood at the entrance of her wedding reception, eyes locked on mine as if I were a stranger who had wandered in uninvited. Gasps rippled through the guests. Her fiancé shifted uncomfortably at her side, but his smirk betrayed him. And then, as if to twist the knife, she turned and slipped her arm into the arm of his father, a man in a black tuxedo with a polished grin. "This is my real father now," she declared. Laughter sparked in the corner. Glasses clinked. Someone whispered, "Did you hear that?" and chuckled under their breath. I stood frozen, gift box in hand, my heart pounding but my face perfectly still. For a second, the chandeliers above blurred in my vision. The violins screeched off-key. But I didn't let a single muscle twitch. Years of running businesses, negotiating with sharks, and surviving betrayal had taught me this. Rage is weakness. Silence is power. So I smiled, just barely, a cold curve of my lips, controlled and sharp as glass. "Understood," I said softly. I turned my back on her. My shoes echoed against the marble floor as I walked slowly toward the exit, each step deliberate, steady, as if this had all been expected. But inside, something cracked. I had dreamed of this day, walking her down the aisle, giving her away to a man I believed worthy. Instead, I was being shoved out like trash, replaced in front of everyone by a man who had done nothing for her except stand next to money. The murmurs followed me. "Imagine your own daughter saying that. Maybe he deserved it. She always did think she was better than him." I reached the door, my hand on the heavy brass handle. That's when I heard it. Not her voice. His. Her fiancé leaned close to her, smugness dripping from every word. "He won't be a problem anymore. By tomorrow, his house and money will be ours anyway." And then my daughter laughed. A laugh I didn't recognize. Soft, cruel, nothing like the little girl I had raised. "Good. That old man has nothing left to give." The words punched harder than her rejection. My grip on the handle tightened until my knuckles went white. This wasn't humiliation. This was theft. A plot. I pushed the doors open and stepped out into the night air. The cold cut through me, sharp and bracing. Guests' laughter echoed behind me, muffled now, like the buzzing of insects. I didn't look back. Not once. Outside, the street was silent. My reflection stared back from the glass of the reception hall. A 60-year-old man with silver hair, a straight posture, and eyes that burned. They thought they had ended me. They thought they had stripped me of dignity. But I felt something else rising inside me. Not rage, not despair. Precision, calculation. I had spent decades building everything they now wanted to take. Brick by brick, diner by diner, dollar by dollar. I hadn't survived ruthless competitors and greedy bankers just to be undone by my own blood. No, if they wanted a war, they had just chosen the wrong man to start it with. I left the gift box on the stone steps of the hall. A symbol, my last gesture as the father she had disowned. But deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning, because while they toasted inside, convinced they had broken me, I had already started piecing together the truth. And before the night was over, I would learn something that would change everything. The cold night clung to me as I walked away from the reception hall. My daughter's words echoed with every step. "This is my real father now." I had known distance was growing between us, but never in my darkest moments had I imagined a public execution of my role as her father. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I wandered through dimly lit streets, past storefronts closed for the night, past couples holding hands, their laughter a cruel reminder of what I had just lost. My shoes scuffed against the concrete, steady and unhurried, outwardly calm, but inside, a storm churned. By the time I reached my front door, the gift box was still missing from my hand. I had left it behind, abandoned on the church steps like a relic of a dead relationship. I turned my key slowly, stepped inside, and let the silence of the house wrap around me. This house, my house, the last place that still felt like mine. I loosened my tie and sat at the kitchen table, the glow of a single lamp painting the room in tired yellow. I pulled out my phone. The screen lit up with a series of notifications. Missed calls, unread messages. My daughter's name appeared over and over, 47 times. She had ignored me all year, and now suddenly she couldn't stop calling? For a moment I considered answering. But no, she had made her choice, and her voice no longer held the power to sway me. I scrolled through the messages. Most were empty, just the log of unanswered calls. But one stood out. It wasn't her. It wasn't anyone I knew. An unknown number. A single text. She's not who you think she is. Check your property records. I stared at the words, my thumb hovering above the screen. My first instinct was suspicion, a prank, maybe some cruel joke. But a deeper instinct whispered something else, warning. I stood, crossed to my office, and powered on the old computer I rarely used anymore. The machine hummed to life slowly, as if resisting the weight of what I was about to uncover. With practiced keystrokes, I navigated to the county's property database. Line by line, the records loaded, sterile black text on a glaring white screen. And then my stomach clenched. My house, the very one I was standing in, carried a note. Pending transfer. I scrolled further. My diners, the small chain I had built with my own hands over decades, bore similar marks. Bank accounts tied to those properties showed unusual flags, frozen transactions, unexplained adjustments. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. A network of quiet moves designed to strip me clean. And the name attached to those new filings? Not hers, not her fiancé's, but his father's. The same man she had proudly called her real father in front of everyone. I leaned back in my chair, breath sharp in my lungs. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was written in legal text, signed and filed. They hadn't humiliated me just for sport. They had orchestrated a coup. Tonight's spectacle was the curtain raiser for a theft already in progress. My hand closed into a fist against the armrest. I should have felt rage, but instead a strange calm spread through me. Clarity, calculation. I had underestimated them. That was my mistake, and I wouldn't make it again. In the reflection of my darkened monitor, I caught my own eyes. Not broken, not defeated, cold, focused. I whispered to the empty room, to the woman in the photo frame on my desk. My late wife, Elaine. They think they've buried me, but they don't know what I've prepared for moments like this. The house was silent, but the words seemed to echo back. I shut the laptop, the sound sharp and final. I had answers now, but also questions. How long had this been going on? Who else had known? And how deep was my daughter's role in this betrayal? I didn't have all the pieces yet, but one thing was certain. This wasn't the end of the night. It was the beginning of the hunt. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my office, the glow of the desk lamp illuminating papers scattered across the mahogany surface. Bank statements, property deeds, contracts, all the pieces of my life laid bare in front of me. For decades, those papers had been my shield, proof of what I had built from nothing. Tonight, they felt like evidence at a crime scene. The crime? My own family plotting against me. The text message from the unknown number gnawed at me. She's not who you think she is. Check your property records. Whoever had sent it knew exactly where to strike. And they had been right. By dawn, I had a full pot of coffee drained and a stack of notes written in my sharp, steady handwriting. Names, dates, account numbers. A map of betrayal. At 7 a.m., I made my first call to Alan Hughes, my lawyer of 20 years. His voice was groggy but alert once he heard mine. Alan, I said, I need to know if anyone has tried to move assets under my name without my consent. There was a pause, papers shuffling on his end. Then a sigh. Harold, I was meaning to call you about this. I thought it was a mistake, a clerical error. But yes, your properties have been targeted. A series of filings were made last week. Transfers pending. My grip on the phone tightened. And you didn't think to tell me immediately? I was verifying before alarming you. But Harold, the signatures, they're almost perfect copies of yours. Someone had access to documents you once signed. This isn't amateur work. I closed my eyes. Forged signatures. Access to my files. Only 2 people had ever been allowed near my personal documents outside of Alan. My daughter and Elaine before she passed. I thanked Alan curtly, hung up, and sat in the silence. My mind kept circling the same thought. She hadn't just humiliated me. She had stolen me, piece by piece. By noon, I forced myself outside. The sun was bright, but it felt hollow against the weight in my chest. I drove past one of my diners, a small brick building with a neon sign buzzing faintly in the daylight. The staff waved when they saw me, and I forced a nod, but inside I felt a sick twist. How long before this diner, too, was signed away? I parked and sat for a while, watching families stream in, children tugging at parents' sleeves for pancakes. This diner had been my first. Elaine had waited tables here when we couldn't afford extra staff. My daughter had once colored pictures in a booth at the back while I worked the grill. Now she was laughing at my ruin. I drove aimlessly after that, ending up near the florist where Elaine used to buy roses. I went in, bought a single white rose, and placed it on the passenger seat. A reminder. Silence doesn't mean surrender. Elaine had always said kindness was strength. But tonight I realized strength could also mean restraint, waiting for the right moment to strike. That evening, as the sky turned orange, my phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. Another message. You're not alone in this. Meet me tomorrow, 2 p.m. The park by the fountain. My heart thudded. A trap? Maybe. But whoever this was, they knew too much to ignore. The next day I arrived early. The fountain gushed water into the autumn air, leaves swirling in the breeze. Families walked by, children tossing pennies into the pool. I sat on a bench, coat collar pulled up, scanning every face. At 2:05, a woman in her 40s sat down beside me. Dark hair pulled into a bun, nervous eyes flicking around. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "You don't know me," she said softly, "but I work for him. The man your daughter calls her real father." My pulse quickened, though my expression stayed still. "I've seen the papers," she continued. "The transfers, the signatures. They're planning to cut you out completely. And your daughter, she's helping. She signed off on half of it herself." I stared at the fountain, water spraying in arcs. I had expected betrayal, but hearing it spoken aloud by a stranger made it real. Final. The woman stood, smoothing her coat. "They think you're finished. They laugh about it. But I couldn't stand by anymore." She glanced at me once, quickly. "I'll send you proof." And then she walked away, blending into the crowd, leaving me alone with the roar of the fountain and a truth that settled like ice in my veins. I had thought the humiliation at the wedding was the worst pain a father could feel. I was wrong, because now I knew my daughter hadn't just turned her back on me. She had joined hands with the man stealing my life. That night, I barely moved from the chair in my office. The house was silent except for the occasional groan of the floorboards, like the building itself could sense the weight of betrayal pressing down. True to her word, the woman from the park sent me an email. No subject line, just attachments. I clicked them open one by one, my pulse steady but my jaw tight. Scanned contracts, power of attorney documents, loan applications, all with my name at the bottom. My signature, or at least what looked like mine. The forgeries were flawless. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed I had signed them myself. But the dates, the context, the sheer volume of them told a different story. They had been preparing this for months, maybe longer, and then I saw her name, my daughter's, signed on the dotted line beside his father's. The papers were filled with her consent, her acknowledgement, her participation. My chest ached, but my eyes stayed dry. I wouldn't give them my tears. Instead, I printed the documents and laid them out across my desk, aligning them neatly like puzzle pieces. Each paper told a fragment of the same story. They weren't just cutting me out, they were burying me alive. I leaned back, staring at Elaine's photograph on the shelf. Her smile in that picture was gentle, warm, the kind that had carried me through storms. Looks like our daughter made her choice, I whispered. But so have I. The next morning I called Alan again. My voice was calm, measured. I need you to verify every filing under my name in the last 3 months. Quietly. No alerts. Can you do that? Alan hesitated only a second. I'll get on it. I knew I could trust him, but trust alone wasn't enough. If they were bold enough to forge my signature, they were bold enough to anticipate my moves. I needed to be ahead of them 2 steps at least. I spent the afternoon at the county clerk's office. I posed as a curious retiree, updating his records. The clerk didn't know she was showing me the outlines of a war. Dozens of pending transfers, requests for reassignment, hidden beneath layers of paperwork. All funneled to shell companies tied to his father's name. I walked out with copies tucked under my arm, my mind sharper than it had been in years. They thought age made me weak. They thought grief over Elaine had softened me. They had forgotten who taught them to play hard in the first place. That evening, my phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. Check your bank tomorrow. You'll see how deep it goes. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The next morning, I sat with Alan in his office, the thick scent of leather and paper hanging in the air. He slid a folder across the desk. Harold, it's worse than we thought. They've leveraged almost everything. Loans taken against your diners, against your house. On paper, you're drowning in debt. If these filings go through, you'll lose everything. I flipped through the folder, each page a fresh stab. But my face remained calm. I looked Alan in the eye. How long do I have? Days. Maybe a week. I nodded. Good. That's enough. Alan frowned. Enough for what? I stood, tucking the folder under my arm. For me to remind them whose name is really on those deeds. That night I drove past the wedding hall again. The lights were out, only shadows flickering in the stained glass windows. But I imagined her standing there in her gown, announcing to the world that I was no longer her father. I let the image burn in my mind. Then I replaced it with a colder one. Her face when she would realize the trap had been hers all along. Back at home, I spread the forged documents across the dining table. One detail caught my eye, one they had overlooked. A witness signature. Someone close to them. Someone I knew. And when I saw the name, my stomach dropped. It wasn't just my daughter and her new family involved. It was someone from my own circle. The name glared at me from the witness line, the ink bold even in a photocopy. I read it once, then again, as if my eyes had betrayed me. But there it was. Daniel Carter, my oldest friend. We had built our first diner together, flipping eggs and bacon on a greasy grill before sunrise. When Elaine and I married, Daniel had stood beside me as best man. He had been Uncle Dan to my daughter, bringing her gifts every Christmas. And now his name was printed neatly beside the forged versions of mine. A witness, collaborator. I sat back in the chair, the papers trembling faintly in my hands. The betrayal by my daughter cut deep, but this was a blade twisted into an old scar. For a long while, I stared at the wall, hearing nothing but the ticking clock. Finally, I stood, poured myself a glass of water, and drank it slow, calm, measured. Rage was tempting, but rage clouded the mind. I needed clarity. The next day, I drove to Daniel's auto shop. The smell of oil and gasoline clung to the air, same as it had for decades. Daniel looked up from under the hood of a sedan, wiping his hands on a rag. His face lit up like always, like nothing had changed. "Harry," he said, smiling wide. "Didn't expect you. What brings you in?" I studied him, every wrinkle, every flicker in his eyes. If he was guilty, he wore the mask well. "Just thought I'd check in," I said evenly. "Been a while." We talked about nothing, the weather, the Eagles, the rising cost of parts. But all the while I watched his hands. Steady, confident, too confident. Finally, I leaned against the car and asked, "Dan, you ever sign anything for my daughter or her fiancé's family?" The rag froze in his hand, just for a second. Then he chuckled. "What? No, of course not. Why would I?" but his eyes darted, once quick, toward the office in the back where he kept his papers. It was all I needed. I smiled thinly, clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Good seeing you, Dan." Driving home, my hands gripped the wheel tight. I had confirmation, even if he hadn't confessed. The betrayal was wider than I thought. My daughter hadn't just turned against me. She had recruited my oldest friend to help bury me. That night, I opened the email from the unknown number again. Another message had come in. "You know now. Don't confront him. Watch him. You'll see more." I frowned at the screen. Whoever this was, they knew too much. About Daniel. About everything. I typed back for the first time. "Who are you?" No reply. I barely slept. My mind spun through decades of loyalty, laughter, dinners, birthdays. Daniel had been there for all of it. How much had he sold for? How long had he been laughing behind my back? The next morning, I parked down the street from his shop. Through the dusty windshield, I watched. Hours passed. Cars came and went. Daniel moved between the garage and his office. Nothing unusual until late afternoon. A black sedan pulled up. Out stepped a man I knew too well, my daughter's soon-to-be father-in-law. The same man she had called her real father. Daniel shook his hand, smiling, talking like old friends. They walked into the office together, shutting the door behind them. My stomach turned to stone. This wasn't just betrayal. This was partnership. As the sun dipped low, the office light glowed yellow. I sat there in the growing dark, engine off, watching shadows move across the blinds. When the door finally opened, Daniel walked out first, his face pale, his jaw tight. Behind him, the man followed, carrying a folder tucked under his arm. The sedan pulled away. Daniel stood outside his shop, staring at the ground, running a hand through his thinning hair. He looked shaken, not victorious, which meant one thing. Whatever they were planning, Daniel wasn't just helping. He was in over his head. I drove home that night with headlights off for half the street, coasting slowly past houses lit with warm lamps, families eating dinner together. It all looked so normal, so untouched. But I knew better. My world was shifting beneath me. Daniel wasn't just complicit. He was tangled in something he couldn't control. That folder tucked under the arm of the man my daughter now called father. That folder carried weight. And Daniel's pale face told me he didn't like the load. I poured myself a drink when I got home, the amber liquid steady in my glass. I stared at Elaine's photo on the mantelpiece. "You always told me people show you who they are when the money's big enough," I whispered. "Guess you were right." The next morning, I decided to test Daniel. I called his shop. His voice came through after 2 rings, hurried, almost too cheerful. "Harry, twice in 1 week. What's going on?" "Need a favor," I said calmly. "Truck's making a noise. Think I could bring it by tomorrow?" A pause. Then, sure. Anytime." His tone wasn't right. Too eager, too nervous. The following day, I pulled into his garage. Daniel greeted me with that same forced smile. While he tinkered under the hood, I leaned against the wall, arms folded. "You've been busy," I said casually. He glanced up, eyes narrowing. "Busy? What do you mean?" "Oh, new business partners, big meetings, late-night conversations." The wrench slipped from his hand, clattering on the floor. His jaw tightened. I bent, picked up the wrench and handed it back. "Careful," I said softly. "Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself." He took it, his face pale. But he said nothing. That silence was worth more than a confession. I left the shop, drove straight to the diner. Sat in my usual booth in the corner, coffee steaming in front of me. I pulled out the folder of forged documents again, laying them flat on the Formica table. Customers bustled around me, oblivious. But to me it was a war map. I studied every signature, every witness line, every date. Patterns emerged. Transactions spiked around specific days. Days that coincided with events my daughter had organized with her fiancé's family. She hadn't stumbled into this. She had orchestrated it. And Daniel, he was their leverage. That night, my phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. Another message. He's cracking. Push him and he'll fold. I typed back quickly. Who are you? Why are you helping me? 3 dots blinked, then vanished. No answer. Frustration simmered, but I let it cool. Whoever they were, they knew too much to dismiss. And they were right. Daniel was close to breaking. The following evening, I parked outside his shop again. Rain tapped against the windshield, streaking the glass. Through the window, I saw him pacing in his office, phone pressed to his ear. His gestures were sharp, desperate. Then he slammed the phone down, buried his face in his hands, and sat heavily in the chair. I rolled down my window, letting the rain soak my arm as I listened. His voice carried faintly through the thin glass. I can't keep doing this. He'll find out. Yes, I signed. No, it wasn't supposed to go this far. My chest tightened. Every word was confirmation. But then, something unexpected. He pulled a second folder from his desk drawer. Not one I'd seen before. He flipped it open, scanned it quickly, then shoved it into a locked cabinet. I leaned back in my seat, the rain drumming harder. There was more. Another layer. Another secret. And if Daniel was hiding it from them, then it was something I could use. The image of Daniel shoving that folder into the cabinet played in my mind all night. I knew that look. The quick dart of the eyes, the way his shoulders hunched like he was shielding himself. He wasn't just complicit. He was hiding something even from them. By morning, I had a plan. I called Alan, my lawyer. I need access to records that might not be public. Daniel Carter has been moving documents. Anything tied to him, any filings in the last 6 months, I want to see them. Alan hesitated. Harold, you're asking me to dig deep. If Carter's cooperating with them, his name won't show on official paperwork. Then look for the shadows, I said. The shell companies, the witnesses, the transfers. He's left a trail. Find it. Alan promised to try, but I knew better than to sit still. That evening, I drove back to the auto shop. The lights were dim inside, just one lamp glowing in the office. I waited until the last mechanic left, until Daniel locked the front bay doors. Then I stepped out of my car, rain dripping from my coat, and walked quietly around the back. The office window was cracked just enough. I leaned close, peering through the blinds. Daniel sat at his desk, head in his hands, the same folder open in front of him. I couldn't see everything, but one page caught the light. A list of names. My name at the top, followed by properties, account numbers, and then something else. A second column. Investors. My stomach tightened. These weren't just thefts. They were sales. He wasn't planning to take my assets for himself. He was funneling them into someone else's hands. I stepped back from the window, rain pattering against the pavement. Whoever was behind this had money, connections. More than Daniel, more than my daughter's fiancé's family. Daniel was the middleman, a pawn. The next day, Alan called me. His voice was tense. Harold, you were right. Carter's tied to 3 new shell companies registered out of state. They've all been moving large sums in and out, but here's the kicker. One of them is directly connected to your daughter's fiancé. And another, it traces back to a group I think you'll recognize. My grip on the phone tightened. Who? An old competitor. Eastman Holdings. I nearly dropped the phone. Eastman. The man who had tried to buy me out 20 years ago, when my diners were just starting to grow. I had refused his offers, fought him in court, and won. I hadn't heard his name in years. And now here he was, crawling out of the past, using my own daughter to finish what he couldn't before. I sat heavily in my chair, the weight of it settling on me. It wasn't just betrayal by blood. It was betrayal weaponized by an old enemy. That night, another message buzzed onto my phone. Same unknown number. Now you see, it's bigger than her. They've been planning this for years. I typed back quickly, who are you? Why help me? This time an answer came. Someone who's been burned by Eastman too. I stared at the words, the glow of the screen harsh in the dark room. My unknown ally wasn't just some bystander. They had skin in the game. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. Pieces were falling into place. But the picture was darker than I expected. My daughter, Daniel Eastman. Threads of betrayal woven into one rope tightening around my neck. But ropes can snap. I closed the phone and whispered to the silence, to Elaine's photo on the wall. If Eastman thinks he's already won, he's forgotten who taught him to bleed. And in that moment, my resolve hardened. Because now it wasn't just about taking back what was mine. It was about ending this war once and for all. I spent the next few days moving like a ghost through my own life. By day, I kept to my routines. Coffee at the diner, evening walks past the river, so no one would suspect I knew anything. By night, I worked in my office, piecing together every scrap of information Alan uncovered. Eastman had returned. My daughter was his weapon. Daniel was his pawn. And all of them thought I was finished. They were wrong. The beauty of greed is that it blinds. They wanted more, faster, bigger. And I knew how to feed that hunger until it consumed them. The first step was bait. I called Alan. Draw up a draft of a partnership agreement. Make it look real, airtight. I wanted to show that I'm transferring control of my last diner chain to a new holding company. Something flashy, too good to resist. Alan hesitated. Harold, you realize if they think this is real, they'll jump at it. That's the point, I said. We'll let them sign their own confession. He exhaled. You're playing with fire. I've been burned before, I replied. I know how to handle the flames. The following night, I arranged a quiet meeting with Daniel. I called him late, just past 10 p.m., when guilt gnawed the deepest. He picked up on the second ring. Dan, I said smoothly, I know things are messy, but I've got an offer that might solve your problems. Meet me tomorrow, noon, same booth at the diner. He stammered, searching for words. Finally, okay, noon. When I walked into the diner the next day, Daniel was already there, hunched over his coffee. He looked older, thinner, like the weight of secrets had hollowed him out. I slid into the booth, set a manila envelope on the table, and pushed it toward him. What's this? He asked. An agreement, I said. A chance for you and your friends to take everything you want. Control of my chain. Ownership. It's all in there. Just signatures needed. His eyes flickered as he opened the envelope. He scanned the pages, his lips parting in disbelief. This gives us everything. I leaned forward, my voice calm, cold. Exactly. Everything. All you have to do is bring it to them. Show them I'm done fighting. Tell them I'm surrendering. Watch how quickly they'll bite. He swallowed hard, sweat glistening at his temple. And what do you get out of this? I let the faintest smile curve my lips. Peace. Daniel closed the folder slowly, sliding it back into the envelope. They'll love this, he muttered. I watched him leave, the envelope tucked under his arm. And I knew the hook was set. But that night, as I sat alone at the kitchen table, another message buzzed onto my phone. Be careful. He's weaker than you think. And desperate men make mistakes. I stared at the screen, my gut tightening. The next day proved the warning true. At noon, Alan called me in a low voice. Harold, the papers you gave Carter? They're already moving. But something's wrong. He added a clause. One you didn't write. My eyes narrowed. What clause? That your house is included. If this goes through, you won't just bait them with your diners. You'll bait them with your home. I stood slowly, the phone hot against my ear. So Daniel had decided to sweeten the pot. Not just my business, my life. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then I spoke evenly. Good. Let them think they're getting everything. The deeper they sink their teeth, the harder it will be when it snaps shut. Alan hesitated. Harold, you sound like a man who already knows how this ends. I do, I said quietly. And so will they. But as I hung up, a thought gnawed at me. If Daniel was desperate enough to tamper with the bait, then he wasn't just cracking. He was dangerous. The trap was ready. All it needed now was their greed to spring it shut. Daniel called me 2 nights later. His voice was hurried, shaky, but eager. They're in. They want to meet tomorrow. The father-in-law, Eastman, everyone. They want to sign. I let a long silence stretch before answering. Good. Tell them I'll be there. The next day, I walked into Alan's office earlier than usual. The smell of leather and dust mixed with the faint trace of his cologne. Alan looked up from his desk, brow furrowed. Harold, I'm nervous about this. You're walking straight into their den. I straightened my tie, my reflection sharp in the glass cabinet behind him. That's exactly where I want to be. At 5 p.m. sharp, I pulled into the underground garage of a high-rise downtown. A private suite had been rented, papers and pens waiting on a long mahogany table. The air smelled of fresh polish and ambition. Daniel was already there, fidgeting with his cuffs. When he saw me, his eyes darted away. He couldn't meet my gaze. Minutes later, they arrived. Eastman first, older now, but no less arrogant. His silver hair slicked back, his eyes cold and hungry. Behind him, my daughter and her fiancé, hands entwined, smug smiles plastered on their faces. And finally, the man she called her real father, adjusting his cufflinks like a king entering his court. The sight of her nearly buckled me. My daughter, flesh of my flesh, smiling at my destruction. But my face remained carved from stone. We all sat. Papers were spread out, Daniel sliding the envelope across the table with trembling hands. This, he said, is the agreement. Full transfer. Ownership, properties, accounts. Everything. My daughter snatched the papers first, scanning them quickly. It's true, she whispered, eyes gleaming. He's giving it all up. Her fiancé laughed under his breath. Told you he'd fold. Eastman leaned back, steepling his fingers. I knew the old man would eventually understand. Resistance is wasted energy. I let their words wash over me like static. Inside, I marked every word, every expression, storing them like weapons. Then the man she called father slid the contract toward himself, pen in hand. Shall we make this official? Daniel cleared his throat. One small addition, his house, included in the transfer. My daughter's eyes lit up. Perfect. We'll finally have everything. Alan, seated beside me, shifted uncomfortably. He opened his mouth, but I placed a hand lightly on his arm. Not yet. I leaned back, expression calm, watching their pens scratch across paper. Signatures bloomed across the pages like stains spreading on white cloth. Eastman signed last, his hand steady. He looked up at me with a smirk. And just like that, Harold, you're finished. Everything you built, it's ours now. The room buzzed with their excitement, their triumph. My daughter even raised her glass, toasting the end of me as though I were already in the grave. But then, Daniel hesitated. His hand hovered over the paper, the pen trembling. His face had gone pale, beads of sweat rolling down his temple. My daughter snapped, "Sign it, Uncle Dan. What's the problem?" He looked at her, then at me. Our eyes locked across the table. For the first time in weeks, he didn't look like a traitor. He looked like a man cornered, choking on his own guilt. Do it, Eastman barked. Daniel's hand shook harder. Then, with a sudden burst, he dropped the pen onto the table. I can't. The room went still. My daughter's smile faltered. Her fiancé cursed under his breath. Eastman slammed his palm against the table. What the hell do you mean, you can't? Daniel's eyes darted wildly. Panic etched into every line of his face. You don't understand. If this goes through, we're all finished. He set us up. Gasps filled the room. My daughter turned to me, her face pale for the first time. And in that silence, I finally spoke. You're right, Daniel. My voice was calm, almost soft. This was a setup. Every word, every signature, you've just written your own downfall. Silence clung to the room after my words, heavy and suffocating. Every eye was on me now, the traitors, the thieves, the daughter who had disowned me. I placed my hands flat on the table, slow and deliberate. That contract you were so eager to sign, I said, my voice steady, isn't a transfer of ownership. It's a confession. Every forged signature, every fraudulent clause. It's all documented here. And now it's signed by each of you in your own hand. My daughter's face drained of color. What? She whispered. Alan reached into his briefcase and produced another folder, this one thick, stamped, and official. He slid it across the table like a dealer laying down the winning card. Filed with the district attorney this morning, he said evenly. With copies of all your forged documents. What you just signed confirms everything. Congratulations, you've all admitted to conspiracy and fraud. Eastman shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. This is a trick, he barked. It won't hold up in court. Alan didn't even flinch. It's already holding. Prosecutors have been waiting for this moment. By now, your offices are being searched. The man my daughter had called her real father slammed his fist against the table, veins bulging in his neck. You can't. But before he could finish, a sharp knock rattled the suite door. Then another, heavier. Voices barked from the hallway. District Attorney's office. Open up. Daniel's face crumpled in his hands. My daughter gasped, her fiancé clutching her arm in disbelief. Eastman cursed under his breath, pacing like a trapped animal. And I sat still, calm, watching. The door burst open. Men in dark suits swept inside, badges glinting, their movements efficient, rehearsed. Papers were seized, briefcases opened, cell phones confiscated. The room erupted in chaos. Mr. Eastman, one agent said firmly, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted grand larceny. They cuffed him, ignoring his shouts. Next was the real father. He tried to protest, to push past, but was shoved firmly into the corner, his wrists bound in steel. Finally, their eyes turned to my daughter and her fiancé. She stammered, Wait, this wasn't. The agent's tone was cold. You signed the papers. That's all we need. Tears welled in her eyes as they snapped the cuffs around her wrists. For a moment, she looked at me. Desperation, betrayal, and something else flickering in her expression. A silent plea. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. She had chosen her side. Daniel sat frozen, head bowed, muttering under his breath. When they finally let him out, he didn't resist. One by one, they were taken. The suite emptied of voices, of arrogance, of betrayal. All that remained was the silence of victory. Alan turned to me, his expression grave. It's done. They'll spend years fighting charges, but the case is solid. You've won, Harold. I nodded once. No smile, no triumph. Just certainty. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked to the window. The city stretched out below, lights flickering in the dark like stars against the black. My reflection looked back at me. Silver hair, lined face, steady eyes. They had tried to erase me, tried to strip me of everything I had built, tried to replace me in front of my own blood. But they had forgotten one thing. I wasn't a man who screamed. I wasn't a man who begged. I was a man who waited, who planned, who struck once and only once when the blow would end it all. Behind me, Alan gathered the papers, his voice faint. You don't have to stay, Harold. It's over. I turned from the window, my steps steady as I left the room. No words, no goodbyes, just silence. Cold, final, unbroken. The war they started was finished, and I had won.